Oh my god, Billy, it's a love story made for us. Hello, boys and ghouls. If you're new here, I am Sierra Celine, and this here is my boyfriend, Billy Bones, and we're here to talk to you about Nekromantik. But before we do, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and click that little bell thingy to get notified. I post regular movie reviews and gameplays, all with a horror theme to them. And trust me when I say that you won't want to miss what's coming. We're on part 3 of my Disturbing Movies tour, and finally we have one that I don't have to cross my hard limit. But I still need to put a trigger warning before this one. There's no way around it. It's gonna be uncomfortable. This entire movie is about, you guessed it, necrophilia. So if that's something you're uncomfortable with, you have been warned. In previous installments, I've talked about making movies that are shocking just for the sake of being shocking, and being shocking to make a point. Nekromantik kind of falls in between those two categories. Released in 1987, this was basically a movie-long excuse to rebel against the censorship standards of West Germany at the time, which the director saw to be oppressive. So despite having absolutely no aspirations of being a director, he made a movie that would offend in every way possible, didn't submit it for review, and then released it exclusively available to adults. Which, in the grand scheme of things, was probably for the best anyway, considering the film's subject matter. The movie follows Rob, a young man who works for an agency meant to clean up corpses from public areas. This job has granted him the perfect opportunity to gather things like bones and eyeballs, which he then decorates his house with. One day, Rob is left in charge of cleaning up a corpse that was found in a pond, but rather than disposing of it properly, he takes it home to his girlfriend for, fun times. The corpse is at a pretty advanced stage of decomposition, too, so watching them run their hands over its slimy body is, well, disgusting. After a very long scene of the couple enjoying themselves with this corpse, it becomes clear that Rob's girlfriend prefers it to him. And all this comes to a head when Rob loses his job, prompting his girlfriend to yell at him for not being man enough to stand up to his boss or to provide for her. She then runs away with the corpse, prompting Rob to go into some weird downward spiral. He kills a cat and then bathes in its guts, murders a prostitute, and then rapes her corpse in a graveyard, and ultimately winds up dying by suicide. This movie actually isn't very long, it's just over an hour, but it still feels like they had to pad it out. Nothing fucking happens. It's like they came up with a premise for a disturbing movie, but then didn't know how to write a full story around it. And the worst part is it isn't even realistic. I mean, sure, necrophiles exist, but nobody would want to have sex with a decomposing corpse, right? Right? Oh boy, this video is about to take a weird turn. Strap in, folks, you're in for a story. On December 17th, 1979, apprentice embalmer Karen Greenlee stole the hearse that she was driving, along with the week-old corpse that was in the back, and then she just disappeared for a few days. When she was found, Greenlee had attempted suicide, and written a 4.5-page note confessing to molesting the corpses of up to 40 young men over the years. Her life was ultimately saved, and she faced jail time for theft of the vehicle, although necrophilia technically wasn't illegal in California at the time, so she was off the hook for that. Years later, in 1987, an interview with Greenlee was included in Jim Morton's book, Apocalypse Culture, in which she detailed exactly what it was like to live with her, proclivities. And as it turns out, Greenlee's opinion of the whole thing had changed drastically between 1979 and 1987. When Greenlee had attempted to take her own life, her suicide note had included statements like this: "Why do I do it? Why? Why? Fear of love? Relationships? No romance ever hurt like this. It's the pits. I'm a morgue rat. "This is my rat hole, perhaps my grave." But by the time she got around to doing the interview, Greenlee had actually begun to accept herself and her desires, seeing her previous guilt as nothing more than a reflection of society's opinions. She even stated that she found the smell of death to be erotic, and that she liked to see blood coming out of the mouths of her, partners. Now, I have no evidence that Nekromantik was at all inspired by Greenlee's case. The two things took place in different countries, and the director has never claimed to be influenced by it, as far as I know. But regardless, there are similarities between the two. Both Rob in the film and Greenlee in real life work in positions where they're supposed to take care of these corpses, but instead they take advantage of them. Both Rob and Greenlee show an appreciation for decay, and one of the things that people found most interesting about Greenlee's case is that she's a woman, when 9 out of 10 necrophiles are men. So that might have had some bearing on how Rob's girlfriend responded to the whole thing. But the parallel that I find most interesting is the way that Greenlee describes being a necrophile in her suicide note. Here, she describes feeling completely separated from and rejected by society. She has no one. She can't connect to the living because of her fear of love, and she can't possibly resist the lure of death. And that seems to be a very important theme in Nekromantik. Isolation. Rob doesn't steal the corpse for himself. Sure, he has his own fascinations with death, but it's his girlfriend who seems the most, excited by being with a corpse. He does it to make her happy, and even when he loses his job, she brings up the fact that he can no longer provide her the things she needs, since he's no longer working close to death. In a way, stealing the corpse was his attempt to make a connection with a living lover, his girlfriend. But this all fails. She leaves him alone with his death obsession, and this all culminates in his suicide. He can't resist the lure of death any more than Greenlee can. Another theme that permeates the film is this crisis of masculinity. Rob's girlfriend leaves him because he can't fulfill his expected duties as the breadwinner. If he can't stand up for himself and provide for his family, then he's useless, worse even than a corpse. I also can't help but wonder if there's some sort of significance to the fact that the corpse doesn't have a phallus. They have to fashion one out of a pipe, which first, ow, but secondly, I don't know if I'm reading too much into that. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. There are other interpretations of the film as well. I've read some arguments that it's supposed to reflect a loss of morality. There's this one scene during Rob's big breakdown where he goes to a movie theater and watches a slasher movie, and the audience seems to be very bored by it all. And some critics have argued that this is supposed to mean that they no longer care about human suffering. Really, it could just mean that they're stuck watching Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Still, other critics have interpreted it as a metaphor for love in the day of AIDS, which I see less of. More than anything, Nekromantik is a story about a lonely, weird man who has trouble connecting with anyone, so he turns to the one thing that he does have experience with: death. It's a story about social isolation and feelings of inadequacy. But that also isn't to say that this movie is a work of genius by any stretch of the imagination. The acting is terrible. The special effects are hilariously bad at some point. I already mentioned the fact that it has more padding than a drag queen's bra. And my favorite hilariously bad part about this movie is the score, which ranges from someone who really can't play the violin to someone who can play the violin. They just didn't know what this movie was about. You can really tell that the director was not a director by trade, and all the things that are decent about this movie were nothing more than happy accidents. I will give the movie this: it is the only necrophilia love story I've ever stumbled across, so it might be worth giving it a watch for that, you know, if you're into that sort of thing. The movie did set out to be weird, and it definitely succeeds in that. But personally, I found this movie to be much more interesting to read about than to watch. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click that little bell thingy to get notified. We have just a couple more entries in this disturbing movie marathon before I wash my brain out with bleach. So make sure to join me next time when we talk about Cannibal Holocaust. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and while you're down there, why don't you leave me a comment? Let me know if you've ever seen Nekromantik, and if so, what did you think of it? Thank you so much for watching, my pets, and I will see you next time. Love you.